Hi, very good morning, Jim from Avstar. It's not just the magnetic poles that are getting overlooked by, climatologists and governments worldwide. The problems that we're facing now are massive, and I've said this many times. If you really want to get a good grasp on what's coming next, just watch the countries with the largest populations. China, India, they're going to be facing some real serious issues in the coming future. And it's already in some circumstances happening. I mean, have a look at all the development that's been done in China and been left derelict for 20 years. Brand new buildings, cities built, which have just become ghost towns. You got the weeds growing through the new streets that was put down. It was like that they spent the money on the most expensive part of the construction. The outer walls, the roof, the streets, and all the other infrastructure. And then, it was all the finishings that was left. And these buildings obviously weren't finished, so they was probably never sold. In some cases there was, but in most cases there wasn't. And the development company went bankrupt because, China being a communist country, most of the governments run, the banks, the construction companies and everything. It was just killed off. And there are thousands of these projects in China that have gone unfinished. Millionaires wiped out overnight. And what we're facing now over the rest of the world is the exact same thing. Real estate is going to collapse globally, just like it has in China. And you always got a good gauge with a population that's massive, because anything new that affects that population affects it 10 times faster than any other country with a less population. So you consider, a country like England probably has 1/12 of the population of China. We've got about 60 million people. We've probably got actually 1/20th of the population of China. Whatever's going down in China is going to affect us a lot less sooner than what it will China and all the other bigger countries. You have got a pecking order. I could do a pecking order here. I could show you starting from the largest population and going down through all the other countries, naming their population, and I could say how these issues that are affecting countries like China now are going to affect other countries down the road, and at what sort of rough idea of what time it's going to affect them. But you look at China right now; it's in dire straits. The manufacturing's got serious issues. The employment rate has tanked. People haven't got any money. People are bailing out of the, the social services sector. Where they pay the government their pensions up front, and then when they retire, they get them. Look, they're crying at the moment because the only people that are benefiting from pensions are people that have had government jobs. You might want to note that down in your book. Yeah, because government employees are going to be the last ones that when they retire are not going to have a pot left. Just, if you're in the private sector, then, anything can happen. They can steal your money. It's happened in the West. It hasn't just happened in the Far East. It has happened in the West. Your pensions have been robbed. I've had some friends that work for a very well-known company, worked there all their lives, supposed to have retired with £500,000 in their pension pot, and that pension company, just before they was about to claim it, I think there was a couple of years away from claiming the pension, and the pension company had changed hands, and it weren't long after it changed hands. Yeah, as you would fucking imagine a Ponzi scheme, the company went bankrupt, taking their pensions with it. So they said they'd made some bad investments with the pension funds and lost the money and had to go into receivership themselves. But you know as well as I know, someone took a lot of that money away in that pension company for themselves before that happened. And it's just like stock, shares, anything, any commodity really. When things get tough, then there's always the potential for corruption to kick in, and it usually does. So, the social security funds in China now are what people are bailing out of. That's going to lead to, can you imagine down the road when people do get to retirement age and they've got no money and the government probably ain't going to bail them out, then you're going to have a serious issue on your hands in China. And I think, if you look at countries like China, they've got too many people in government. Have you seen it? It's like, it's like Westminster on steroids. Thousands and thousands of government employees. And of course, it's a massive drain on the revenues that's raised by the country. But the big thing that's coming, and this is the one that really sees us all off down the road, and it's also, like I said, like I started this video off, if you think the fact that the governments around the world are ignoring the magnetic poles migrating and the effects that that's having on our climate, which in turn has an effect on the food production around the world, because if the climate's not reliable, then your farmers are going to make a lot of mistakes, make a lot of bad gambles. Because I'll tell you now, you ask any farmer, it's never a guaranteed business. It's a risk from day one. You might risk putting thousands of pounds worth of seeds in the ground, and you have some bad weather, and you can watch that money just get washed down the drain, literally. So it's a gamble, as in the best of times. But then you throw in climate change, and then you've got big problems on your hands. It becomes almost an unpredictable business to be in. So we're going to see the food reduce, but that's not all, guys. There's a bigger thing coming that affects everybody. Farmers, governments, everybody. It affects absolutely everybody. And that's this ignoring of advancement in technology. Because you see, the world is geared up in what is known as the capital system. And technology is taking the jobs away from people that participate in the capital system. And if you can't get a job, and if you can't exchange your labour for money, because that's what a job is all about, so that you can participate in a monetary system, if you can't get access to a job and you can't swap your labour for money, then if you've got no money, how can you participate in a monetary system? When the pockets run empty, they're empty. If you've used up all your credit cards, if you've used, any available loans to you, if you've used the equity in your property, and you still turn out your pockets and nothing but fluff falls out of them, then what? What are you going to do then? If you've got no friends to turn to, or family, or those friends and those family members are all in the same boat, then what are you going to do? You see, they failed to teach our children survival in schools. Because, most people, when they run out of money, and they haven't got access to food and water, and they haven't got a shelter over their head, their health deteriorates very, very quickly. And if you times that by tens of thousands, 20,000, 500,000 people, you've got crisis on your hand. And this, like I said, you want to make a note of this, because this is what's coming. They are purposely, the governments around the world, failing to acknowledge that the capital system is completely on its way out. And it will end. Because you cannot have, technology running away at the rate it is, like it is now, and hope to keep people in a job so that they can participate in the monetary system. And what we've got here is quite obviously a very selfish attitude where, so long as I'm okay, so long as the shops have got food in there and I can afford to buy it, then I'm okay. I don't need to worry about this. And certainly if I'm a government employee, I don't need to start making contingency plans to bail other people out, because it's not that bad yet. But I promise you now, watch how China go on in the next 4 or 5 years. Watch what happens to them. And if you think you're isolated, your country's isolated from issues like this, Think again, because you will have already started to see the cracks in the systems that are running in your country right now. When you look at the infrastructure and the failure to maintain that infrastructure, you know there's something wrong. And if you look in the government offices and the lights are on way into the middle of the night, you know that somebody has already figured it out, but they are reluctant to do anything about it. We've had 6 Chancellors of the Exchequer here in the UK in the last couple of years. Each and every one of them obviously knew economics and was champion at economics, but when they took a look at the books and they realised the gradient wasn't in favour of a sunny day, but more along the lines of a rainy day, thunder and lightning, couldn't get any worse, they realised that they couldn't do anything about it, and it was probably a good idea to pass the book on to the next Chancellor, and that's what we've got right now. They do realise there's something wrong, but they are failing to do something about it. There needs to be another system emergently put into place right now to avoid what's coming, if there is going to be any avoiding of it. Otherwise, we're going to see global collapse on a scale that we've never seen before. It will be totally unprecedented. It will affect every country in this world. You know, what can you do about it? Well, I told you a few years ago, and it wasn't financial advice by any means, you know, and you can't hold me responsible for nothing, but if you'd have listened to me a couple of years ago, you'd have had more equity out of your property then than what you'd get out now. I could have saved tens of thousands of pounds for people. I could have put them in a nice, secure parachute that their feet would have touched the floor, you know, peacefully. But a lot of people didn't listen to me, and they were just going to see this carry on now. This issue is going to run out of control. Trust me, there's nothing that they can do, that they are willing to do, should I say, right now, to avert the issues that are coming. You know, with artificial intelligence wiping out jobs left, right and centre by the tens of thousands in countries all over the world, you know, the issue becomes even more noticeable. And you're very lucky. You know, I've got the time sometimes to afford myself, the opportunity to actually think about these things. But this isn't something new that I've just suddenly realised. I've been telling people this for the last 10 years. You know, have a look at your car manufacturing factories now. What is building the cars? Is it human beings, or is it robotics and actuation systems and computers and now artificial intelligence? Where are the jobs? Car factories used to employ thousands and thousands of people. They can't do it anymore. You know, because the shareholder wants his dividend at the end of the year. He wants a return on his money annually. And the only way to do that is to cut the biggest cost in any manufacturing sector, business, across the range. Let's kill the labour off, human labour. Integrate it with technology, robotics, because they will not take a piss break. They will not need to go home after 8 hours work, 9 hours work shift, or 12 hours, whatever. They do not need to have a weekend off. They do not need to have a sleep on the evenings. They don't need holidays, and they're very rarely sick. All they need is a regular bit of maintenance. That means you don't need so many human beings on the production lines of any company nowadays. Have a look at Amazon. It used to employ a lot of pickers. Now it's all automated. You know, robots stopping at particular points on the track. It's like a roller coaster. If you're looking at an Amazon factory now, the tracks just run everywhere, and they self-pick the products. They self-stack the products. You've got forklift trucks now driving around, you know, picking and loading trucks without any human activity. So that's where it's going. I'm asking you a question. Where are you going to get a job from in the future? You know, in the UK, supposed to be a first world country, and yet the children, or I shouldn't say, the young adults, let's say that, can't get a job. You know, and can you imagine the morale after 6 months of applying for thousands of jobs and not getting an interview in some cases, or getting an interview but not getting through to the second stage of that interview, or getting through to actually being given the job. Can you imagine what that does mentally to the morale? You see other people around you getting on, in the process and progress of their lives. They've got a car, they've passed the tests, they've got themselves, a 1-bedroom apartment's what we all start out with, isn't it, at the beginning? But they can't do it, even that. They're still with the parents in their early 30s, mid-30s. Why is that? Because parents is cheaper than, cheap living. You'll get away with giving your parents, a couple of £100 at the end of the month towards the running of the house. You won't be able to get yourself into your own accommodation with £200. You're laughing. This doesn't exist anymore. The cost of living has gone through the roof, even in countries like the UK, and we're seeing it in America. I want to ask the question. Okay, fair enough. Donald Trump has cleaned up DC, got rid of all the homeless people. Where have they gone? All of a sudden they've become, they've got themselves a job. They've now got accommodation. They give up their bad habits of drugs and drink and everything else. Nah, they've disappeared somewhere else. They're going to turn up on somebody else's door. You might move them from one place to another, but you ain't getting rid of the problem just by moving them. So, and we've got a problem with homelessness in the UK. People say it's their own fault. Is it? How? Could you imagine being homeless? Not only, is your health from day one going to start to deteriorate, you might think you're a bushcraft survivalist. Yeah, right. Put that to the test. Let me tell you something now. Even with my skills and knowledge of a lot of things across the range, I'm going to struggle and I'm going to be miserable if I have to live outside. Yeah, I can light a fire, I can build a shelter, I can clean water, I can do all that, but do you think I want to? Would I want to give up what I've got right now? I'm quite partial to eating off my Valerie Bosch plates off Richard Miller cutlery. I love that. I like to eat my meals at a table, not sit in a fucking bush with a plate on my lap, while the rain's pissing down and probably coming through several holes in the roof of my makeshift home. Nobody wants that sort of life. Yes, you can survive like that, but it ain't nice. But, if they continue to ignore the big issues that are taking place right now, we're going to run into some big problems, big trouble down the road. And, the way I see it is nothing's changed. It's on course for a disaster. And, I don't like the attitude of these politicians. I really think it's bad and it's got to go. They shouldn't be in the positions that they've got. They are definitely not thinking of the public interest. And you might think, well, how can you be so gullible to think that they would anyhow? Well, because, that's what they're supposed to be doing. But nobody seems to audit them. No one seems to regulate the government to make sure what they're supposed to do, they do. Because they're all being lobbied by, people like AIPAC, foreign entities interfering in governments. It's not just AIPAC, it's the military complex, it's the pharmaceutical industries, lobbying the government, giving them money. The worst thing you can do, right, when you've got, a beast that's fed on, just animal feed, is give it, good quality food. You start giving that animal or the beast, caviar and steaks and whatever, you're going to spoil its mouth and it's going to want to continue that lifestyle. And it's no different. This is the big mentality shift that we've got to take. We've got to take some real bold steps. We've got to suck it up and we've got to start selecting proper people to run our countries, not just mouthpieces that make promises and make manifestos and don't keep them. Sir Keir Starmer and David Cameron and Richie Sunak, your likes, and Boris Johnson. We've seen your sort of leadership. Couldn't be any further from the truth. If you was any good at leadership, right, you would have a very successful business right now. But you haven't. You're living off the proceeds of the corruption you managed to get away with while you was in government, all the deals you managed to make, and now you're living off them proceeds. You think we're stupid in the UK? We don't see how you make your money, eh? But if you was anything, you'd have your own company. You'd be the CEO of your company. If you was a good leader, you could turn, a rubbish company into an overnight success. But you ain't got those skills. You should never have had the job of Prime Minister or leader in any of the country in the first place. What, you think Donald Trump is a genius at business? You know how many businesses have gone bump for Donald Trump? He was almost bankrupt before he come back into the White House this second term. And look what he's doing now. You're telling me there isn't a conflict of interest with these people? Why would billionaires want to take a job on that only paid less than $100,000? Or £100,000? Why would David Cameron or Sir Keir Starmer want to take a job on that paid less than £100,000 when they're already millionaires? You know why? It's because of greed. Like I said, gravy dripping off their chin, mashed potatoes on the side of their face, gravy all down their shirts, pigs at the trough. You get the picture? They don't know when to stop. They're addicted to corruption. They're filthy, stinky, horrible, rotten people. And until we get the right people in power, nothing will ever change. And until there's some recognition of some of the simple things about, running of countries, understanding global issues, nothing's going to change in this world. And we are therefore dead course for a collision in the future, which will be, we won't be able to deal with it. It will knock us back into the Dark Ages, because you cannot replace what we've got in the drop of a hat overnight. Because when you lose certain companies, you lose the ability to manufacture certain things. That's how this train comes to a halt. Or should I say the ship? It's an even better analogy, because when that comes to a halt in the middle of the Atlantic, you are proper stuffed. You've had it. Because you're dead in the water at that point. That's the same analogy for all these people that are going to run out of money, run out of the ability to use credit, run out of the ability to have a loan. Little bit by bit, it will be taken away from you if you don't act. And this needs to be through into a 180 degrees U-turn, this situation, because the problems are coming thick and fast, and the inertia behind this system is massive. Even if with the goodwill of all the politicians in the world, if they choose to overtly throw this into reverse now, it ain't going to be resolved within the next couple of years. It's going to take a bit longer because of the inertia. You can throw money at something in an emergency crisis, it ain't going to change nothing short term. So you can't fix the problem with money anymore. You've got to fix it with real solutions. Guys, if you want to know what's coming down the road, then look at these countries with the bigger populations. Look what's happening internally in those countries. Look at how the governments are having now to behave, because they've got no other choice but to behave like that. You'll get a good idea as to what's coming down the road for you, your family and your loved ones. There's a link down there, guys, if you want to help us and support what we do. We're trying to help people, genuinely trying to help people. How many people today will you hear talk about these issues with you so openly and honestly? Tell me that. I just want to know. Put it in the comment section. Is there a motivation driving their communications with you on YouTube? Is there a reason for them to talk like they do? Get smart, guys. There are people genuinely out there trying to help you guys. I'd like to think you think I'm one of those, because we have proved ourselves time and time over again here on this channel We don't sell mugs, hoodies, baseball caps. We haven't got a shop selling you bug out equipment. Because our business, I've always seen it, has been in information, informing you guys. So links down there if you want to help support us. I really hope that some people do see, the worthiness of doing that. I'll say what I usually do in here. You take care of your loved ones. As always, bye for now.